Hi, ladies. Welcome back to the Flourish Writers Conference. So our vision here is to encourage and equip you to dream, write, and publish the story inside of you. And I'm your co-host, Jenny Cokerts. And I am excited. I think we're all in for a treat, including myself. So it's really an honor to chat with one of my favorite, just women, communicators. She's a virtual mentor of mine, even though she may not realize that, and someone that I admire, and I greatly admire her ministry, and that's Havilah Cunnington. And so thank you so much, Havilah.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
And we're excited. So we're going to be talking about, today we're going to talk about communication. And we're going to talk about the importance of communication, really how we're all called to communicate in some way. Yeah. And so even if we see ourselves, this is a writing conference, right? But even if we see ourselves as writers, we need really good communication skills. And the reality of today is that regardless of if we see ourselves as a communicator or as a speaker, we need to be able to communicate effectively in both.
Yep.
And I think more and more as well. But before we get into all that good information, tell us a little bit about yourself and your family and your ministry.
Yes, of course. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm honored, and I love seeing women that just go for it and build their dream by empowering other women to do what they're called to do. So this is like something I can tell we're already kindred because of that you're even doing this. I'm Havilah Cunnington. I am the founder of an organization, nonprofit / ministry called Truth to Table. Mm-hmm. And Truth to Table was founded really through not an accident, but it started with me writing a book and quickly grew into becoming a platform where we now have a membership and people are part of our community. And then I also travel and speak consistently throughout the year. And I have 4 young sons. I'm a wife of my husband, Ben Cunnington, and my 4 boys. We had 4 boys in 5 years. We had 4 C-sections in 5 years.
Oh my God.
I have a 12-year-old Judah, 10-year-old Hudson, an 8-year-old actually on Thursday. So you guys, whoever's watching this, he's already 8. Mm-hmm. And I have a 6-year-old, and he's Grayson, and then Beckham is 6 years old. And so we have 4 boys, and then I have my dog Bear, who's at my feet right now. He's a golden doodle. And so I'm surrounded by 6 men in my life. And we're full-time with Truth to Table. We have a little staff and offices in Redding, California. Mm-hmm. And we do a lot of empowerment courses, writing books, teaching and training. And this year we're going to launch our live events. So we'll start that very soon. I know. It's wild. I'm saying that in faith.
Okay. So as I mentioned, our vision for this conference is really to empower women, like you said, to dream, not just dream. I think we all have a dream. I think so many people come to us with that dream. I want to get my story out, my God story out, or I want to write a book. But we want to take them to the next step on really how to write and how to and publish. It just means how to share it, whether it be all kinds of different avenues. So we're going to take a few minutes and really talk about communicating our stories. So you said we are called to communicate life through story, through the narrative of what God has given us. And really, I would say at what he's done in our lives. So what are some tips for being an effective storyteller? How can we take our stories, and sometimes they're hard stories, and communicate them as God's stories?
Yeah, I love that. I keep saying, I don't think I made it up, but I love the phrase story is king. And it's true. I've done a lot of research neurologically. People remember stories more than data. And it's just critical. People can remember a story from years later, and they won't remember the statistics or the specific events. And I think about even for faith-based people, Jesus told stories. He was the parable teller. And he told stories all the time. And it's because our brains hold on to feelings and emotions and all of that with stories. So even as a communicator now, I am always working on my story. And part of that story was that it's great to tell 1,000 stories, but there's about 4 to 5 key stories you will tell over and over and over about your life. And I always say your superpower is your story, because it's yours and no one can take it away from you, and it's your conviction. So here's what's really critical is when someone says I'm a book writer or I'm a speaker or I'm an author, that's great. But more importantly, you're a storyteller. And it's great that you want to write a book, but if you just go to write a book, then only your mom's going to want to read it. Right. But you've got to really learn how to tell a story. And for me, I was not an author. I was actually have a lot of learning issues. I had reading and comprehension issues. I was severely dyslexic. I was behind in school. So my academics were not one that kind of propelled me forward to be a voice and a published author. I actually was kind of going the opposite direction. And what happened for me was I got good at telling my story. And the story for me was that, that there were painful parts that I didn't want to talk about, but if I was willing to talk about them, people could connect with me because everybody relates to pain. Everybody relates to having a struggle. And then if I could give them a secret to what worked for me or just the next step for what worked for me, then I could begin to be a voice of influence in their life. Nobody wants to listen to somebody who has it all together. That's great. Go do magazines and go figure that out. But in real life, people want to know that you're human and they want to know what worked for you. The two places people get most stuck on is it feels too complicated, so I don't know how to do it. And then also, I don't know where to start. So those are the two key components where people really get stuck in their life. I don't know where to begin and it's too complicated. I don't know how to do it. And so if you can define those two aspects. So for me, I realized as a speaker, I had to get better at writing because I had to learn to have multiple ways to communicate my story. So I can't just be an author anymore. I love you, but unless you're writing, stories and fantasy, that's great. But if you really want to communicate your story, you're going to have to know how to write posts and social media. You're going to have to do a Facebook Live. You're going to have to know how to do a commercial here and there, maybe a podcast. So there's a lot in it that you're going to have to grow in, and there's no longer can you just go, I'm just an author and that's it. It really requires you to somewhat not sell yourself, but be able to give people your message in all different ways. And they have to be able to see you as a holistic communicator.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. And I think it's becoming more prevalent for you to be able to communicate verbally as well as be a great communicator.
You have to.
In writing. And what about, because I think a lot of times women come to us and they say, my story was just hard. And I want to tell it because I want to tell what God did in my life. But how do they go from, you have some hard stories as well. How do you take something where you're not depressing your audience, whether they're reading it or you're speaking it? Where do you kind of shine the light? And what can you say about that?
It's a great question. I think sometimes we are premature to share stories where we haven't fully had a complete thought behind, like a full transformation. And, I remember one time we had this person, we were doing testimonies at our church, and one of the girls had submitted her testimony, but you found that the story was hard. God's good. And we realized, you don't have the process yet. You don't have the plan. You don't have the redemptive moment. You've been redeemed, but you don't know how, you haven't had enough soul and heart and mind work to know. So what you want to do is really go back to, if I was in that place, what do I need to know? And you want to get to the basics, but you also need to know where you're taking them, like what you're unto or what's the purpose. So what I often will do when I go to write a message or write a book is and I just finished my I don't know, 7th book maybe. We just did it called Leap into Love, Living Present to Your Purpose on the Planet. It's on Amazon. It's actually number 300 on Amazon right now, which is insane. But the cool part is that I will always sit down and I don't start by writing. I always go into what am I trying to get people to understand? What is the end result? If they were to walk away, what do I want them to know? And this is critical with our stories. It's great that you went through hard stuff or that you may have been through abuse or that you have, you're healthy and whole now. But what do you want people to know? And there's usually an underlying narrative, a line that you often say you don't even know it. So you have to listen to yourself. What are you saying? Like, I want to give people hope, but what do you want to give them hope for? And where do you want to take them? And then spend some time, spend a month, spend 2 months, get right in what can I say it in one sentence. So for me, with Leap into Love, my one sentence was, I want to live present to my purpose on the planet. Because what I realized was the study was meant to be about self-acceptance and radical love distributing towards ourselves and others. But I found that wasn't the end result. I got stuck there for about 5 months. I'm like, it's going to be self-acceptance. It's going to be about abandoning ourselves and then profound acceptance. And that's what it's going to be. And then I realized that's not the end result. The end result is that I want to be present to my purpose on the planet. And in order for me to do that, I've got to be able to accept myself. So that's a process of going deeper inside and asking yourself really good questions. And you kind of go on this hunt, at least for me as a writer and a communicator. It's like that old fairy tale where you're going down the path and you're taking a little crumb here and a little crumb here. And eventually you wander into an open field where you realize, oh, this is where I'm supposed to be. And that's the process. So often I'll start somewhere. I'll even write I wrote this one of this, it's a Bible study, but I wrote the first week 3 times. And I realized as I got to second week, no, I didn't get there. I'm not where I need to go. And you go back. So part of that editing and stuff is really critical. But for those that are trying to figure out what your story is, I want you to write down one sentence. What do I want them to take after all is said and done? What can they walk away with? And what's that one sentence? And spend as much time as you need on that one sentence, because that will be the foundation to the narrative in which you lay for the rest of your book or your message or whatever you're doing.
Yeah, that's perfect. And yeah, another way of saying that is the transformation. Like that's what we usually call it. Like what's the transformation you want who you're speaking to or who's reading to have? And then we notice that a lot of the details in our story actually become rather irrelevant sometimes.
They do.
When you're focused on the transformation.
I would agree with you. I think, I remember we used to have this communicator at our church, and he would get up to share a story, and he would say, and the premise of the story was, I spoke to somebody on the street and encouraged them. But he started out the story as, I went on a 10-mile run, and I run every morning, and then I stopped off and I talked to somebody. And all you're thinking is like, I could never run 10 miles. I'm not that cool. And number 2, he runs 10 miles. He doesn't look like he runs 10 miles. And your head's going all different places. Yeah. And so what you think is like, I said, if you become the hero of the story all the time, people don't want to hear it. They need to be the hero of the story. So if you say something like, I didn't feel like talking to anybody and I was out doing what I normally do every day, and it was like it was nothing special. But when I stopped, here's what I was experiencing and here's what happened. People can see themselves in the hero of the story, but it's all about you. And I think part of being a really great communicator is knowing what to add and what to get rid of. And the things I have to get rid of are often painful because I want to share that part. I want to tell them about the details. I get excited about this one part, but I realize, is it about them getting it or is it about me wanting to communicate it? And then I have to edit that as well. So that's, I feel like, is really, really critical. I used to do this when I would tell stories, is I would only allow myself 10 bullet points, and they were only 1 lines. And I'd have to say, if I wanted to take them through my whole life, I'd have to say, born in a good home, raised with a twin sister, dealt with comparison, had learning issues, had a radical encounter at 17, started my journey. And so I had to get it in 10 bullet points, and that was it. And then I want to say this, because I know we're kind of segueing, but for your communicators that are listening right now, you have to break up with the lie that you need to be profound. Because you don't need to be profound. You just need to say what's out there. Like for me, they said expertise is only about 20% more than the average person. You become an expert. And if I was waiting for myself to feel profound, or if I was waiting for myself to feel like a published author or feel like an incredible communicator, I would never do it. Part of it was that I was ignorant enough and naive enough to just put myself out there. And that's really critical. The part of you that feels like, I don't know if this is relevant or if I'm that profound, welcome to real life. Welcome to what it looks like to be an author or a communicator. No one out there feels like they have it all together or that they're wow. And even at times when I felt like, oh, I know what I'm going to say, it falls flat. And there's something about it because you can't navigate that. That's really about sharing in the community. And you don't even know. Sometimes people will say, oh, that part of your message. And I'll think, I prepared 7 hours on this part. And that was like I just threw it in there. And that was the point, because there's more to the story than you know. So I would say, get rid of that idea that you have to be profound or you have to be an expert. You've got to start getting your story out there, and you'll probably do 7 to 10 rough drafts before you ever get there.
Yep. No, I agree. So you have actually, we're going to kind of talk about a little bit about your publishing journey.
Yeah.
You have self-published several Bible studies. And is your newest one self-published as well?
It is. Okay. I published last year with Thomas Nelson. Yep. And then this year we decided to go back to self-publishing.
Yeah, which is great. I think that's such a great experience for authors to have both sides.
Yeah.
And because they're very different. So what have you noticed are some of the differences as communicating as a writer, as an author? And then also I know that you speak several times, numerous times a year as kind of a speaker or preacher. And what has been your experience with both? Are there a lot of similarities?
No, there's really not. For me, publishing wasn't something I'd always hoped to do. I know that that's probably uncommon. I have most of my friends that wrote books had a desire to write and wanted to be published, and that's what happened. For me, I realized I had to come to a point where I realized if I don't write books, my voice is going to stop. I can only go certain places, and I really wanted to be a mom, and I really wanted to be home with my kids. And in order to do that, I needed my voice to continue while I was at home or going to soccer practice. So writing allows our messages and our stories to continue. When I'm speaking in a room, a lot of times what I communicate in a book and what I communicate on a platform, they don't work the same way. And so when I'm communicating the platform, I would say 50% in the room is expectation and the other 50% is preparation. So I'm often, if I get up there and I prepared, but nobody really cares what I have to say, doesn't matter how great a communicator I am, they won't pull it out of you. But sometimes if I haven't prepared, but they're ready, I oftentimes will even feel like it was great because they're pulling it out of you. As a writer, it's really, I feel like writing is way more vulnerable because the words live on. So as a communicator, I can kind of go, or know that I'm not going to go back there, or know that they might forget what I said. But as an author, I find that the process is very revealing and very vulnerable because it's my story. It's my life. It's how I process. And, I do have that inner critic that says, that's not biblical, or you shouldn't say it that way, or what about this? And I have to really, one thing I do when I go to write is I don't read books because I'm confident I'll plagiarize people. Because when I'm about to write, I'll think it's my thought because I'm delirious and exhausted. And so I'll be like, that was an incredible thought. And then I realize I totally took it from somebody else. So I usually don't read while I'm writing. I like to kind of keep it quiet. And then I always write when I'm when I'm writing a book, I always have, and I think Amy Porterfield talks about this, but it's your tiger hours. So I have a certain amount of hours that I know I'm going to get more done within that window of time than any other time. So I write from 4 a.m. in the morning till about 8 to 9 in the morning. And that's my magic time. That's when I get it done. And then after that, I go into do real life and all the other things that are coming my way. But you find your little window and you do that.
Yep. And actually, I'm going to piggyback on that because I know a lot of people, one of the biggest questions is, how do you find time to write? How do you find time to write? So when you go into that, we always say that you really have to find where you work best, because the last thing you want to do is work late at night and it's not your best work. Or for somebody, it might not be early in the morning. It might be late at night. But do you go into that? How prepared do you go into that time? Or is it more like free writing? Do you have a good outline? What works for you?
Okay, so now I'm now in 6 years of writing, and we've written, gosh, how many books? I think I've written 6 Bible studies and 2 full-length books. And I did not know how to write because I wasn't a writer, and I wasn't very academic, and I wasn't studious, and I wasn't much of a reader. It was so hard for me to know how to do this. I had no kind of inherent part of me to know. And so it was really through pass and fail. I had 2 infants at that time, and I would get up and nurse. And I realized that if I got up, that the last feeding in the morning, if I would just stay up and write, that's when I realized the window was there. And I realized there were times when I've written books where I'm like, I'll write whatever. And I gained 20 pounds and I'm wearing the same yoga pants and I'm sitting at the same desk and I don't get as much done. So every time now I come up with a plan. So last time I wrote a book, I was like, I'm going to see my counselor every week. Like, that's my plan. And it wasn't even that I had anything going on. It was like, I don't want to get stuck mentally, emotionally, or spiritually. So I'm going to have someone I go talk to everything. So when I go to write, I'm not confused. And then this time I'm like, I'm going to have a regimented eating plan. I'm not going to gain weight because I literally yo-yo every time I write. So I'm going to just stay strong on that. And I'm going to write and I'm going to be done by 11 or noon. I'm not going to write again. So you kind of begin to find your rhythms. But for me, and this is for me, I'm a visual learner. So I have those big white Post-it boards, sticky boards, and I will always write out the whole picture of what I want it to look like. So this time it was Leap into Love, and it was about uncovering roots of self-abandonment, self-rejection, and then growing the right stuff. And so I wrote a tree, and I did all the fruit and what those fruits are and what do the roots look like. And I just had to see it all, and then I segmented it. So for me, I got to see where we're going. When I did the book Eat, Pray, Hustle, Dream Chasing God's Way, I did the process of a dream, and I wrote the whole circle. And then it was like week 1 is the life of a dream and the death of the dream and culturing a dream, nurturing a dream. And so I always have to see it, and then I start to write it out. And that to me always takes about 3 to 4 months for me to get that. And then once I get it, writing is not the hardest part. It's always the full picture. And then for me, when I write, I like to stand when I'm writing. I like to dictate a lot. So I'll do dragon dictation, and I'll dictate, throw it in a Google Doc, and then listen to it audibly because I'm such a visual and audible learner. I'll throw it in and then listen to the computer to read me, and I kind of capture that. So for me, I have to work like 3 times harder than most writers.
And I think that's actually what you said last is a great tool for those that feel they communicate better, in a spoken form, is to dictate, but then they have to write. I think that for me, because I started as more speaking and then went into writing and was not confident in my writing, but I found that if I could speak it, I could get it out of my head, and that's half the battle. And I'll use a memo on my phone. So if I get inspired, because often my inspiration always comes when I'm busy doing something else. It's never when I sit down, it's quiet with my perfect cup of coffee. It's always like in the middle of carpool or in the middle of like a date night. And I get this like, oh, that's what I want to say. Yeah. So I'll grab my phone and I'll just record what I want to say and then go back and listen to it later. Or in my phone, I have these little notes, and I'll put illustration, story. And when I write the story, I'll write the connecting point. So if it's like Grayson said this, and then I write the connecting point, like, and this is da 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 da. And then when I go back to write the book, I can go into that file and go, okay, that's a story I wanted to use. Here's the point. Where am I going to put that in? Because when you're up against like silence and trying to write, oftentimes you don't remember anything you were inspired by before. That's such a great point. Actually, that's even helpful for me, because I've always wondered sometimes how authors have the best little illustrations of life for it. And I'm like, how are they remembering these details? But you have to grab them at the moment is the point.
You do. And even like when I listen to podcasts or messages, I'm always writing down like, oh, that reminds me of this story. Because once I write it down, oh, that podcast, she's talked about that. Well, that reminds me of that part in my life. And it doesn't have to connect. The goal is that you're researching and compiling information. And eventually you'll put it all into where you need it to be. I have half a book sitting places. I have brilliant stories that are just sitting there. Because communicators is just having a stockpile of stuff but never being able to use it. It's hard.
So good. That's so good. All right, so we talked about storytelling. Now I want to talk about, we're going to kind of transition and talk about communicating God's truths, which is a big thing as Christian communicators. And I want to read something you wrote because I love it. It says, did you know that everyone was created to communicate? Consequently, we're all communicating something. Is it an accurate representation of who we are? And even more, is it a true representation of who God is? Our responsibility as Christ followers is not just to represent him, but to represent him well. The Bible says in Romans 10:14, how can they believe in him if they have never heard? And how can they hear unless someone tells them? The simple truth is you can't unless someone tells them. And this doesn't begin on a stage, or I'll add in a book. It starts in our daily lives. And to sum it up, the only way to represent Jesus well is to keep the good news really good. So I want to ask you, how do we represent?
Now, who wrote that? No. I wrote
that. Was good. That was you. Yeah, and I loved it and really resonated with me. So how do we represent Jesus well as communicators and communicating the truths of God?
Yeah, if you can't get excited about it, don't expect everybody else to get excited about it.
That's good.
And that's the truth. Like if you're just, whatever you're saying is like, I'm okay. But, sometimes I think we can get so religious and so in our heads about what a spiritual person would say that we up being boring. We end up not being relatable. It's like, yeah, that's what the word says, but gosh, it sounds like an encyclopedia.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I had to really get clear on what excited me and what mattered to me and what are the things that I would like, what resonated with me, because that's authentic, right? So like if I'm recommending something and I'm not that excited about it, people are going to know that. But if you're writing something or communicating something that you're excited about, and for me, I'll tell you what, there were times when I would write something and then I would think, I don't know if I fully know about that. And it would send me on a journey, a spiritual journey, to uncover the truth about what God was saying, or how do I communicate about salvation? How do I communicate about the Spirit filling them? How do I communicate? And I realized that I needed to grow in my own narratives and verbiage. And so for me, that's why writing this book, the last time I wrote this last book, was so hard for me, because I knew I could write the things that I wanted people to hear, or I could write what really worked for me. And those are two different things. And I think the more vulnerable we are, the more we uncover the parts of us we don't want people to hear or see, even in our spiritual life, like the questions we ask and all that, but if we really talk out of a relationship with God and what we have with him, people feel it. They feel the authenticity. So for me, I always am cautious. I don't want people to think I've got to have it all perfect in my life for me to communicate it. Because that's not true. I remember one time going to my dad and saying, Dad, I feel like a hypocrite because I'm preaching these things and I want it to be real in my life, but I don't know if I'm living all of this. And I don't know if I'm able to do all of this. Does that make it bad? Does that make me a hypocrite? Does that make me, is that inappropriate? And he said, Havilah, I've just come to realize that it's those of us that need to hear it the most, preach it. And it was just this permission to be in process in the middle of our message. And that's what I would want your writers to know, is it's okay to be in process, even in your spiritual life. But if you don't know the truth about it and you're still angry and you're still confused and you still don't know what, then give yourself permission to take more time to go through the process and be clear. And once you're clear, people will sense that. And if they know you're leading them somewhere, then you can tell them all the ugly part of it, but they'll know that you're clear. Right. And so that's what I think is really important. Another thing too, and I have a real conviction about this, is really protecting the name of Jesus and who he is. And what I mean by that is, if I say, thus saith the Lord, and God said, and God wants, then what I'm doing is I'm boxing him into whatever my interpretation is. But if I say, I really sense God is doing this, or I believe God would want you to know this, or I know that God came to do this, it allows there to be a little space in our communication, writing, and preaching that allows people to process your humanity alongside God's, sovereignty. And so I think it's really good as spiritual communicators that when we know and it's truth, we make the word of God truth. We make what he said is true, but everything else is interpretation, and to soften it a little so that we don't box God into moments that he actually didn't say. It's just our interpretation of it.
Yeah, that's a really important part.
It is.
That's where there's the gray area. And it is, and we do have to navigate it carefully as communicators.
Yes.
So that's really good what you said. All right, so as we close, I want you to talk for just a minute. You have a course that you just came out with last month, I believe, called Crash Course to Communication.
Yes.
And you have several courses that you're gonna, I think hopefully you're gonna do this year. But why did you create this course, and who's it for? And we'll be putting a link for that.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. This came out of, again, most of my messages and books and everything come out of the need that I had. And as a young woman, I realized I didn't have anybody to shortcut these things. It's taken me, I've been speaking for 20 years, if you can imagine, 20 years on the road. So I realized there were things I knew that I learned through experience and through time and through failing, right? Yeah. And so with the Crash Course to Communication, I decided I would take 10 sessions and I would unpack what it looks like to prepare a message. And the message could be a blog that you write, you preach somewhere. It could be a story, anywhere, a group home, prison, wherever you're going to go minister. But it's to unpack it so that you would understand all of the you know, the secret handshakes that we don't often know, but they work. And I wrote this course with my dad. My dad's an ordained minister and was on the road for 20 years and then a pastor for 20 years. And what we found was that when we compared notes, we were doing very similar things. No one had ever told us. And so we took all of that. So we actually have 2 courses that are live right now. One is crash course. It's all under the crash course communication umbrella. But the first one is preparing a message. And then the second one is delivering a message. And then next year, or I should say this year, we're actually launching how to start a podcast, how to write a book, you know, how to itinerant ministry. So my goal is just to shortcut and help some of these men and women know, hey, you're not alone and you don't need to struggle and figure this out. We want you to be as the best communicator you can possibly be. And I want to be your virtual mentor when it comes to that. So it's a higher priced course. And I understand that because it's not for everybody. It's for those that want to make the investment, know that they're going to communicate for a long time and they need some better, higher quality training. That's what this is.
Yeah. And I highly recommend it. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say it's at theinfluencertable.com. Theinfluencertable.com. They can get all that information.
Yeah. And we'll put the link as well below the video. But I highly recommend it because I think sometimes somebody can get intimidated by developing a message with that wording. However, I think if you're a blogger, if you're an aspiring writer, you really are developing a message.
Yes,
and I think all the tools that or even, you know, sometimes, you know, you put out a book and you do a Facebook Live and you want to give value, or you want to give value in a podcast.
That's right.
It's all a message. And I think I'm so glad because I really haven't seen anything else like that. When I started speaking, I had to hire a speaking coach to really do
yes,
which was a lot more money to do a lot of the same things and help me develop, you know, my message and make sure that I kind of have that mentor alongside. So I am so grateful that you have done this. It is a huge blessing to so many.
Oh, and it's been received amazingly. Like, we're shocked at how many people, and it's all over the world, and people that are youth group leaders or lead a women's group or want to write a book, and they just want to know, like, what is going on behind all that. And it's really more simple than you might think, but you got to know what it is.
Yep. All right. Well, Havilah, thank you so much for your time. This was such a great conversation.
So
I think it's going to be a blessing to many. And I appreciate it. We all appreciate it.
I'm really honored. And again, for your community, like, come find me. I'm on all the socials, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Come say hi and let me know that it was this, because I'd love the connection to know, like, this is where we found each other. And I'm honored to be a part of this. I'm so proud of you that you're doing something like this for women and for men, the communication, like, to teach them how to do this well. Like, bravo. I love it.
Well, I appreciate that. All right, ladies. Well, have a great day.
Bye.